Much more on the website, bbc.com/business. If you want to reach me, I'm at BBC Ben Thompson on Twitter. See you soon.
Hello, this is BBC News. Welcome if you're watching here in the UK or around the world. I'm Ben Brown. Our top stories this hour. Rishi Sunak, the British Prime Minister, says the UK is committed to swift and robust action to counter any threat from China as he attends a major defence summit in the United States.
China is a country with fundamentally different values to ours, and it represents a challenge to the world order.
The BBC Sport presenter Gary Lineker will be back on air as the corporation announces an independent review of its social media guidelines.
Asking Gary to step back off air was, I think, a significant thing, and now we look forward with this agreement moving forward to resolve things and get back to business as usual.
The Joe Biden administration approves a controversial oil drilling project in Alaska, in the biggest such development in decades. Meanwhile, the president insists the United States banking system is safe after the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank.
No losses will be borne by the taxpayers. Instead, the money will come from the fees that banks pay into the Deposit Insurance Fund.
Junior doctors in England begin 3 days of strike action in their dispute over pay and conditions.
The Oscar goes to everything, everywhere.
And at the Academy Awards, one film wins almost everything all at once, including Best Actress. Hello, the UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak says China represents a challenge to world order as it has fundamentally different values. His remarks come ahead of talks on a defence agreement between the United States, the United Kingdom and Australia due to get underway in San Diego in the next few hours. An agreement designed specifically to counter what is seen as a growing Chinese threat. Well, these are pictures of President Biden setting off for those talks in San Diego. With Mr Sunak and the Australian Prime Minister. The three men will be discussing the details of a pact known as AUKUS, which would see greater military cooperation between the three countries, and Australia being supplied with nuclear submarines, an attempt to counter Chinese military power in the Indo-Pacific region. Well, the discussions come as the UK also announces it will increase defence spending by nearly £5 billion over the next 2 years. And in San Diego, we've been hearing from the British Prime Minister on that. Rishi Sunak has been discussing that and the significance of the talks in San Diego with our political editor, Chris Mason. OK, Ione, thank you very much indeed. That's Ione Wells there, our political correspondent. Well, we heard the Prime Minister talking in that interview with Chris Mason about Gary Lineker, and in fact the BBC has announced today that Gary Lineker, one of its best known presenters, will be allowed back on air 3 days after he was told to step back from presenting Match of the Day because of a tweet in which he criticised British government policy. Well, the corporation says it will now hold an independent review of its impartiality guidelines, and in the meantime, the presenter will abide by its current rules on impartiality. In a statement, the broadcaster's Director General, Tim Davie, apologised for the disruption that was caused when other BBC presenters refused to present the weekend sports coverage. Mr Lineker said he's delighted to be getting back to presenting, and he thanked his colleagues at BBC Sport for backing him. Helena Wilkinson has the latest. President Biden has said Americans should rest assured that the US banking system remains safe after the failure of the California-based Silicon Valley Bank. In a televised address from the White House, Mr. Biden said his administration had acted to ensure that Silicon Valley Bank customers would be able to get all their money. He said he would do whatever was needed to maintain stability. And earlier, the British bank HSBC agreed to buy the UK arm of Silicon Valley Bank for just over £1. Our business correspondent Theo Leggett reports. Thousands of junior doctors in England have begun a 3-day strike in their row over pay. The union, the British Medical Association, wants a 35% pay increase, which the Health Secretary has said is unaffordable. Doctors claim they've had a real terms pay cut of 26% over the last 15 years. Here's our health correspondent Jim Reid. Now, if you've watched the David Attenborough's Wild Isles documentary, you'll have seen some pretty amazing images of British wildlife, but you'll also know that nature in the British Isles is under threat at the moment. For the first time, the 3 biggest conservation charities in the UK are uniting to call on all sectors of society to act now to protect the natural world. The National Trust, WWF and the RSPB want us all to take action. Here's our climate editor, Justin Rowlett. Well, you've been watching BBC News. Thank you for your company.
As fighting continues in Ukraine, join our team for the latest developments.
The Russian lines are very close. In fact, we're hearing they're just maybe a kilometre away.
See the headlines as they happen with breaking news alerts in the app and get the full story with bbc.com/news. Follow the story for all the latest with BBC News.
This is BBC News. Welcome if you're watching here in the UK or around the world. I'm Ben Brown. Our top stories. The UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak says Britain is committed to swift and robust action to counter any threat from China as he attends a defence summit in the United States.
China is a country with fundamentally different values to ours, and it represents a challenge to the world order.
The sport presenter Gary Lineker will be back on air as the BBC announces an independent review of its social media guidelines.
Asking Gary to step back off air was, I think, a significant thing, and now we look forward with this agreement moving forward to resolve things and get back to business as usual.
The Biden administration in Washington approves a controversial oil drilling project in Alaska, in the biggest such development in decades. And meanwhile, the president insists the US banking system is safe after the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank.
No losses will be borne by the taxpayers. Instead, the money will come from the fees that banks pay into the Deposit Insurance Fund.
Junior doctors in England begin 3 days of strike action in their dispute over pay and conditions.
The Oscar goes to everything, everywhere.
And at this year's Academy Awards, one film wins almost everything all at once. OK, let's get the sports news now. Gary Lineker's back, but so too is Carthy, and she's got the latest.
Thank you very much, Ben. Yes, that is our top story as well. Gary Lineker will return to present the BBC's Premier League highlights programme, Match of the Day on the BBC, after reaching a deal with the corporation. Lineker was taken off air following a row about impartiality after he criticised the government's new asylum policy, a move which triggered widespread disruption to the BBC's football coverage across the weekend in the UK. Jane Dougal has been following the story and earlier explained how the resolution was reached. That's all from here for now.
Carthy, thank you very much. We'll see you later on. More now on those talks that are taking place in the United States between the US President, British and Australian Prime Minister in San Diego in the US. The three leaders are going to be discussing the details of a pact known as AUKUS. It would see greater military cooperation between the three countries, and it would see Australia supplied with nuclear submarines in an attempt to counter Chinese military power in the Indo-Pacific region. Well, we can talk more about this now with our correspondent Will Grant, who's in San Diego. Just tell us why these talks are seen as so important by the three leaders and the three nations. John Healey, thank you very much indeed. Shadow Defence Secretary, thank you very much. Let's take you back now to our story that's been dominating the news over the last few days here in the UK. The row over Gary Lineker's tweets and the impartiality of the BBC. Gary Lineker is going to return to TV screens. He's going to be back on Match of the Day while the BBC conducts a review into social media use. Let's get some expert analysis of this with Roger Mosey, former head of BBC Television News, also former director of BBC Sport, so uniquely placed really to talk about this story, Roger. What do you think the BBC achieved, if anything, by taking Gary Lineker off the air? Roger, always good to talk to you. Thank you so much. Roger Mosey there, former head of BBC Television News and director of BBC Sport. US President Joe Biden has approved a major oil and gas drilling project in Alaska that faced strong opposition from environmental activists. The company behind the Willow project, ConocoPhillips, says it will create local investment and thousands of jobs. Opponents argue it should be halted over its climate and wildlife impacts. Well, located on Alaska's remote North Slope, it is the largest oil project in the region for decades, slated to produce up to 180,000 barrels of oil a day. Well, let's talk more about this now with Natalie Mebane, who's Climate Campaign Director for Greenpeace USA. Thank you very much for being with us. I'm guessing you're pretty angry about this decision, but as we've heard, it's going to create jobs and it's going to create energy supplies at a time, when we have a global energy crisis. Natalie, good to talk to you. Thank you. Natalie Mebane there, Climate Campaign Director for Greenpeace USA.
Thank you so much.
Let's talk about the Oscars now. The sci-fi epic Everything Everywhere All at Once was the big winner at the Academy Awards with 7 awards, including Best Director and Best Picture. The film's star Michelle Yeoh was named Best Actress, making her the first woman from an Asian background to claim the prize. Brendan Fraser won Best Actor for his role in The Whale, but Everything Everywhere scooped pretty much everything, including the 2 Best Supporting Awards and a first Oscar for Jamie Lee Curtis at the age of 64. Frozen berries used in smoothies, electric bikes and home security cameras have all been added to the list of goods used to track the rising cost of living in the UK, whereas digital cameras and Alco-Pops have been removed. The so-called inflation basket contains more than 700 goods and services. Cost of these items in many different outlets are gathered by the Office for National Statistics to calculate the monthly inflation rate. Now, a record-breaking heat wave is affecting parts of Spain, with temperatures topping 30 degrees. That's more than 80 Fahrenheit. Palma de Mallorca and the region of Castellón both broke records for March, the highest since 1981. People have been flocking to the beaches and to the outdoor bars. Why not? You've been watching BBC News.